A racist man insulted a black young pianist, daring her to dance. But when she did, her talent left him speechless. Before I share with you the story, write in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to not miss our daily uploads. Her body moved like liquid fire, hips swaying with a rhythm that pulsed through the stifling air of the classroom. Slow burn igniting every corner of the space. Sweat glistened on her dark skin, catching the dim light filtering through the blinds, each bead tracing a path down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her faded gray hoodie. The wooden floor creaked under her bare feet, her sneakers kicked aside in a reckless heap by the chalkboard. She spun, her arms slicing through the air, a fusion of elegance and raw power. Ballet's grace tangled with hip-hop's edge, a dance that felt like a dare. Her breath came in sharp, deliberate gasps, lips parted, eyes locked on nothing, and everything at once. The room was hers now, a battlefield claimed without a word. The teacher's smirk had melted into something slack, her thin lips trembling as she gripped the edge of her desk, knuckles whitening. She'd meant to break the girl, to strip her bare with that venomous quip. You people love to dance, right? But the sting had reversed, a whip cracking back on its wielder. The students sat frozen, their whispers snuffed out, eyes wide as the girl's movements carved a story into the silence. Her legs bent and rose, a slow arc of defiance, each step a slap against the teacher's smug certainty. The air thickened with heat, with unspoken things, lust, envy, awe, coiling around them all like smoke. She ended with a flourish, one foot planted firm, head tilted back, chest heaving, daring anyone to speak. The applause erupted, a chaotic wave crashing over the tension, but she didn't smile. She walked back to her seat, hips still swaying faintly, her shadow stretching long across the floor. The teacher's mouth opened, then closed, a fish gasping on dry land. What had begun as a taunt had birthed a reckoning, and the girl knew it. She sat, legs crossed, fingers drumming lightly on the desk, her victory silent but deafening. The story didn't begin here, though, not with the dance, not with the triumph. It began hours earlier, in the gray haze of a late spring morning, when the world still felt heavy with the promise of something sour. The classroom was a cage then, its walls peeling with old paint, its windows streaked with grime that blurred the outside into a smear of green and concrete. The talent day had been announced weeks ago, a half-hearted school tradition meant to coax reluctant kids into performing for a crowd that rarely cared. Most brought guitars, or recited poems they'd Googled the night before, their efforts met with polite claps and stifled yawns. But this year, something simmered beneath the surface, a current no one could name until it broke. She sat in the back, always in the back, her name a quiet whisper among the roster. Kalia Monroe, 19. Though she carried herself older, her eyes sharp like she'd seen through the world's lies long ago. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, strands escaping to frame her face, dark curls against skin the color of burnt caramel. She wore the same hoodie every day, gray and fraying at the cuffs, a shield against the stares she pretended not to notice. The other students kept their distance, not out of dislike, but something closer to unease. She was too still, too watchful, a shadow that didn't bend to the room's rhythm. The teacher, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, ruled the class with a cold precision, her voice a blade that cut through chatter like wire through clay. She was 52, her hair dyed a brassy blonde that clashed with her sallow skin, her eyes small and mean behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd taught at Westridge High for 20 years, long enough to calcify her biases into something she called discipline. Everyone knew she favored the loud ones, the white boys with cocky grins who stumbled through their acts with no shame. The rest, especially the black kids, the quiet ones she treated like stains she couldn't scrub out. Kalia had felt that disdain from the first day, a weight in Hart's glances, a curl in her tone when she called her name. The talent day droned on, a parade of mediocrity. A boy strummed a guitar off-key, his fingers slipping on the strings. A girl read a poem about heartbreak, her voice trembling with rehearsed tears. Hart sat at her desk, arms crossed, her pen tapping a bored rhythm against a stack of ungraded papers. The clock ticked toward noon, the air growing stale with sweat and restlessness. Then her eyes landed on Kalesia, a glint sparking in them, sharp and predatory. She leaned forward, her chair creaking, and the room stilled as if it knew what was coming. "Why don't you show us a dance?" Hart's voice slithered out, oily with mockery. "You people love to dance, right?" The words hung there, heavy and deliberate, a match struck in a room doused with gasoline. A few students shifted, their chairs scraping the floor. Someone coughed. Kalia's fingers paused on her desk, her breath catching, but her face stayed blank. Hart smirked, leaning back, expecting the girl to shrink, to mumble an excuse and fade into the shadows where she belonged. But Kalia stood, slowly, deliberately, her chair sliding back with a soft screech. The room held its breath as she walked to the front, her sneakers silent on the worn wood. She stopped by the chalkboard, turned to face them, and kicked off her shoes, one, then the other, letting them tumble aside. Her hoodie stayed on, a loose armor, but her posture shifted, spine straightening, chin lifting just enough to meet Hart's gaze. The teacher's smirk faltered, a crack in her mask, but she said nothing. Kalia took a breath, deep and slow, and then she moved. Her dance wasn't planned, not in the way the others' acts were. It was instinct, a language her body spoke when words failed. She'd learned it in pieces. Ballet from a community center class her mother scraped money for when she was 8. Hip-hop from the boys on the corner who battled after dark. Contemporary from YouTube videos she watched late at night. The glow of her phone painting her room blue. Each style wove into her, a tapestry of motion she'd never shown anyone. Not like this. But now, with Hart's words still burning in her ears, she let it spill out. Her arms rose first, slow and fluid, a ballerina's arc that stretched the air taut. Then her hips snapped, a beat only she could hear driving her forward. Her feet tracing patterns across the floor. The hoodie swayed with her, fabric brushing her thighs, a soft rustle against the silence. Her curls loosened, spilling free, a dark halo framing her face as she spun. The students leaned forward, their apathy shed like old skin. A girl in the front row bit her lip, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to join. A boy near the window let out a low whistle, quickly stifled. Hart's pen stopped tapping, her hand frozen midair. Kalia's movements grew bolder, a story unfolding in each step. Her legs bent and rose, muscles flexing beneath her jeans, a slow climb that spoke of struggle, of nights spent practicing alone while her mother worked doubles at the diner. Her arms slashed downward, sharp and fierce, a rejection of the box Hart had tried to trap her in. The dance was sensual, yes. Her body curved and rolled with a heat that made the air shimmer. But it was more, it was power, a reclaiming of space, a middle finger to the woman who dared to reduce her to a stereotype. Hart's face changed as the dance stretched on. The smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped frown, her eyes darting between Kalia and the students, searching for control she no longer had. She'd wanted to humiliate the girl, to prove some petty point about who belonged and who did. Instead, Kalia had turned the room into her stage, her body a weapon that cut deeper than words ever could. The teacher's hands clenched, nails digging into her palms, a flush creeping up her neck. She'd miscalculated, and the sting of it was bitter. The dance ended as abruptly as it began. Kalia froze, one leg extended, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, sweat beading along her brow. Her eyes swept the room once, desks haphazardly against the walls, posters curling at the edges, before settling on Hart. The silence was thick, a held breath waiting to break, the air heavy with dust and anticipation. Then the applause erupted, a roar that shook the chipped wooden desks, hands slamming together in a rhythm that mirrored the pulse still pounding in her veins. The students stood, some cheering, others staring in stunned reverence, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Kalia didn't acknowledge it. She bent to retrieve her sneakers, the laces frayed from years of wear, slipping them on with the same calm she'd carried to the front. As she walked back to her seat, her hips still held that faint sway, a lingering echo of the dance, but her face was stone, unreadable as the cracked linoleum beneath her feet. Hart cleared her throat, the sound sharp and brittle, cutting through the fading echoes. "Well," she said, her voice thinner than before, fraying at the edges. "That was unexpected." She fumbled with her papers, pretending to shuffle them, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the worn edges of her lesson plans. The students watched her, waiting for more, a reprimand, A dismissal, but she had nothing left to give. The power had shifted, a tectonic jolt beneath the room's fluorescent hum, and everyone felt it. Kalia sat, legs crossed, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk, a quiet metronome marking her victory, a rhythm that seemed to mock the chaos she'd left behind. The rest of the talent day blurred into noise, a parade of half-hearted attempts. A boy tried a magic trick, his deck of cards slipping from nervous hands and scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. A girl sang off-key, her voice cracking on the high notes, her cheeks flushing as the room squirmed. Hart barely looked up, her pen scratching furious notes in tight, angry loops, her lips pressed into a line so thin it nearly vanished. Kalia stayed silent, her presence a weight that pressed against the room's edges, bending the light around her. The other students stole glances, their whispers weaving through the air, a mix of admiration and something darker, envy perhaps, or fear of what she'd unleashed with that single unshakable act. When the bell rang, the class spilled into the hall, a flood of chatter and footsteps echoing off the lockers. Kalia lingered, gathering her bag, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were testing the room's new gravity. Hart stayed at her desk staring at the wall where a faded map of the world hung crookedly, her glasses fogged with the heat of her own frustration. She didn't look at Kalia as the girl passed, but her shoulders stiffened, a silent acknowledgement of the defeat she couldn't voice, her knuckles whitening around the pen she still clutched. Outside, the air was warm and sticky, the parking lot buzzing with students spilling toward freedom, their shouts mingling with the hum of idling engines. Kalia's mother waited by the curb, her old Toyota idling with a faint rattle, its paint chipped from years of sun and neglect. She was a small woman, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes tired but sharp, carrying the weight of too many late shifts. She'd heard about Talent Day from a text to Kalia sent during lunch. "I danced." They clapped, hearts pit, and now she watched her daughter approach, a question flickering in her gaze, softened by a mother's quiet pride. "You okay?" her mother asked as Kalia slid into the passenger seat, the vinyl creaking beneath her. Kalia nodded, tugging her hoodie tighter around her shoulders, the fabric worn soft from years of use. "Yeah, just had to show her." Her mother's lips twitched, a smile fighting through the weariness etched into her face. "You always do." They drove off, the school shrinking in the rear view, a gray box of peeling paint and broken promises, but the moment stayed with Kalia, heavy and alive. It wasn't just about Hart, not really. It was about the ones who'd come before her. The ones who'd shrunk under that same smirk. The ones who'd sat in those same desks and hadn't known how to fight back. She'd danced for them, too, though she'd never say it aloud. Not to her mother. Not to anyone. And she'd dance again. Not here. Not in this crumbling school with its flickering lights and bitter teachers. But somewhere bigger, somewhere the world couldn't ignore. Days passed, and the story of Kalia's dance spread through Westridge High like wildfire, crackling through the hallways and lunch tables. Students retold it in the cafeteria, their voices low and excited, adding flourishes she hadn't performed, a leap that never happened, a spin that defied gravity, their imaginations painting her into something mythic. Teachers whispered about it in the lounge, their tones a mix of disapproval and reluctant awe, their coffee cups trembling slightly as they spoke. Hart didn't speak of it, but her classes grew stricter, her voice sharper, as if she could erase the memory by sheer force of will. She avoided Kalia's eyes in the halls, her steps quickening when they passed, her heels clicking a retreat. Kalia felt the shift. The way the air changed when she walked into a room, thicker, charged, like the moment before a storm. She didn't want the attention. Not like this, with its sticky mix of hero worship and resentment. But it clung to her anyway. The boy who'd whistled during her dance tried to talk to her once, his grin too wide, his words stumbling over themselves as he leaned against a locker. She shut him down with a look, her silence more cutting than any insult, her eyes cold as the steel behind him. She wasn't here for their approval, she'd never been. At home, her mother watched her closer, sensing the fire that hadn't dimmed, the way it flickered in Kalia's quiet moments. They didn't talk about it much. Their conversations were short, practical, shaped by years of making do, but one night, over a dinner of reheated spaghetti, the sauce congealing on chipped plates, her mother slid a flyer across the table. It was for a dance audition, a local company looking for new talent, the paper creased from being folded too long in her purse. Thought you might want to try, she said, her voice casual but her eyes intent, searching her daughter's face. Kalia stared at the paper, her fork pausing mid-air, a strand of spaghetti dangling. She didn't answer, but she took the flyer to her room, tucking it into her drawer beside a photo of her younger self, gap-toothed and grinning. That night, she danced again. Alone in the dark, the floor cold under her bare feet, the only sound her breath and the creak of the house settling. Her movements were slower this time, less defiant, more searching. A question she didn't yet have words for, a map she was drawing with every step. Weeks later, Hart stood in the empty classroom. The talent day long faded into memory. The desks realigned in their orderly rows. She traced a finger along the chalkboard, her nails catching on the grooves where Kalia had stood, the dust clinging to her skin. She'd underestimated the girl, seen only the quiet, the hoodie, the skin, and missed the storm beneath, the force that had unraveled her carefully built world. It gnawed at her, a betrayal of her own making, a wound she'd inflicted on herself. She'd wanted to prove something, to keep the order she'd built over decades in these cinderblock walls, but Kalia had shattered it with a single dance, leaving her exposed. She wouldn't admit it, not even to herself, but she'd replayed that moment in her mind too many times. The sway of the girl's hips, the strength in her arms, the silence that followed, heavy as a judge's gavel. It wasn't lust, not exactly, but something close, a fascination laced with resentment, a pull she couldn't name. Hart had spent her life wielding power, small and petty as it was, a queen of a crumbling kingdom, and Kalia had stripped it bare without even trying, leaving her to sift through the wreckage. The teacher sighed, her breath fogging the air, and turned off the lights. The room fell dark, but the echo of that dance lingered. A rhythm she couldn't shake, a ghost that paced the empty space. Kalia didn't stop dancing. The audition came and went, her body moving through a studio filled with strangers, their eyes sharp with judgment, their clipboards poised like weapons. She didn't care what they thought, she danced for herself, for the girls she'd been in that classroom, for the ones who'd never get the chance, their names lost to the years. When the call came, a voice on the phone offering her a spot, she smiled for the first time in weeks, a small private thing that lit her face in the dim kitchen light. The betrayal wasn't Hart's taunt, not really. It was the system that had let her think it was okay. The years of quiet cuts, budget slashes, sidelong glances, lowered expectations that had scarred so many before Kalia, leaving them to fade into the cracks. She'd turned that betrayal into something else, something hers, a passion that burned hotter than their hate, a fire she'd stoked with every step. And as she stepped into the studio for her first rehearsal, her sneakers silent on the polished floor, the mirrors reflecting a girl unbroken, she knew this was only the beginning. The rhythm of defiance had started in that classroom, but it wouldn't end there. It would carry her forward, through every stage, every battle, every door they tried to close, until the world had no choice but to see her. And when it did, it would never look away.